I'm Jennifer Hernandez. I practice law in California, and the kind of law I work with is primarily housing, land use, which means getting permission from government authorities to build stuff, and environmental, which means complying with all the environmental standards in the state. I think today's state of housing in California is really almost impossibly complicated result of 30 or so years of intentionally suppressing housing construction through a variety of tools and a variety of stakeholders. We really have not welcomed the construction of new housing in California, or for that matter, the growth of the California population. There's a very strong correlation between a kind of no-growth approach to life and environmental protection. When we first started to think about the environment, it was about clean air and clean water and protecting incredible natural parks and other spaces and species that were on the brink of extinction. Over time, the environment got expanded to how easy is it to park on the spot on my street that I like to park in. And if it's going to be less easy to park in the space I like, then that adversely affects my environment. We say we like our environment as it is, and we don't want those people, and we don't want those structures, and we sure don't want that traffic. And in fact, we don't even want more kids in schools, because if we can keep our school classroom size small, our kids are going to get more attention, and maybe our schools will be rated highly, and maybe then our property values will go up. And so there's every reason for an entrenched homeowner, older majority to say housing should go somewhere else. And that's what we've done. That whole approach that I just described resulted in a major environmental backfire, because instead of maybe building a small apartment building on what used to be a drive-through dairy to pick up milk, which hasn't existed for 50 years, we either let that dairy site stay idle or we put a liquor store on it that was an equally poor use of land in an existing neighborhood. But we didn't want that 4-unit apartment complex. We really didn't, because we don't like more people and more housing. So we built those housing units that people needed where there weren't neighbors to sue. That resulted in the greatest explosion of what in California we call super commuters that history's ever known. Super commuters commute by car more than 90 minutes a day, who are now, pre-COVID, commuting more than 4 hours per day. And that results in all kinds of adverse environmental consequences, not the least of which is clogged freeways and higher air pollution from longer drives. It also results in all kinds of other social disruptions. It was not unusual to see nice cars, dark tinted windows, and laundered shirts hanging in the window, and a fogged interior, because that super commuter decided for this Tuesday night he was just going to sleep in his car rather than endure the commute. We have, quote, trailer parks, long associated with lower income residents, that are kind of remnant land uses. But when you go to those trailer parks, more often than not, you're going to find a teacher or a firefighter or some other middle wage worker who lives in a much less expensive part of California and crashes at the trailer for 3-4 nights a week. And so those are social dislocations of a pretty monumentally poor outcome as far as the environment is concerned. The social and civil rights outcomes are equally horrendous because, for example, in the trailer park context, that should be lower income housing. It may not be ideal, but it should be available for people who don't have enough money for better housing. And instead, it's a second unit for a middle income worker who has no shot. I think we need to acknowledge that there is no shared value that says we have to fix the housing crisis. There's a pretty strong strain of folks who think California simply got too big. We have too many jobs, too much economic activity, and we're over our holding capacity. And so it's appropriate for there to be a great relocation outward. Again, this is not very good for the environment. California is a very efficient user of land. We have higher density by far on a per square mile basis than any other state. And we also have, and even like Los Angeles is more dense than the New York metro area. And you're thinking, how is that possible? Because people think New York and it's Manhattan, but out of Manhattan, you quickly get down to single family, detached homes on bigger lots. And California is miles and miles and miles of 1, 2, and 3 story small units, either attached or detached homes, which have higher occupancy rates in terms of numbers of people. So we have dense housing already. And that dense housing means we also have, along with a temperate climate, lower energy consumption. We actually are pretty good about water consumption. The best example I like to use is when a family moves from California to Arizona, Nevada, Texas, 3 of our most common destinations, the per capita greenhouse gas emissions for that family more than doubles because we have a pretty clean electric grid. We're trying to make it cleaner. But if you define California as a problem of overcrowding or exceeding its holding capacity, then solving the housing problem isn't a shared goal. And then there's the housing problem that is different than just, do you have a place to sleep? There's also the housing problem of home ownership. Upward mobility for median income workers was absolutely part of the California attainable dream well into the 80s. And then we stopped allowing building. And homeownership, it's of course catastrophic for those at the lower educational attainment level. Even if you're working 2, 3 jobs, to buy a home really means buying a home in a less expensive part of the state and commuting. Now there's hope, but the hope is coming not from officially sanctioned government policy. The best example of that is remote work, which has not been sanctioned, even though the various stakeholders have encouraged it over time, but it has not matched with the environmentally and climate focused agenda of building only much higher densities in transit-dependent neighborhoods to get people out of cars and into much smaller living spaces. And while that may or may not be effective in terms of climate, if what it really does is drive people to Texas, it certainly isn't affordable. A high-rise building is 5 to 7 times more per square foot to build than a single-family home or townhome, and duplexes. That's a much cheaper cost of construction. It's what we can afford.